Please excuse my terrible impression of Bane. It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is our plan. Oh, yes. I was wondering what would break first. Hello guys, and welcome back to the Popcorn Podcast, presented by none other than myself, Dylan. And welcome back to this little series I'm doing on the channel. Of course, if you don't already know, I'm going through all of the Christopher Nolan films in the lead up to Tenet and giving you my thoughts on each of the films. In the last video, you can check out my thoughts on perhaps my favorite film of all time, and that of course is The Dark Knight. But in today's video, we are of course talking about the final installment in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, the grand finale if you like. That of course is The Dark Knight Rises. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Without taking any films from the MCU into consideration, The Dark Knight Rises was probably my most anticipated film ever. At the time of its release, I was 14 years old and a much more in-tuned lover of cinema as compared to when I watched The Dark Knight for the first time. Speaking of which, it had been 4 whole years since that film, so as you can imagine, I just could not cope with the anticipation for The Dark Knight Rises. I remember the build-up to it back in 2012. The hype for this last installment in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy was just something so surreal. The official trailer 3 for The Dark Knight Rises to this day remains one of my favorite pieces of film marketing. I remember specifically it was the very last day of year 8 of secondary school, just before we all broke up for summer holidays, and there was easily about 20 of us who all gathered in the school playground as soon as the final bell rang, and we just rushed off to the cinema to go and watch The Dark Knight Rises. When we walked through the entrance to the cinema, I remember just being so astounded by how many people there were inside the building. It was absolutely packed out, as you can imagine, just because it was on opening weekend for this film. And I remember the staff of the cinema were all dressed up in Batman theme. I had this image of one of the cleaners of the cinema in a Batman cowl with a mop. I specifically remember that. And yeah, people were queuing outside the actual screening to get in, even though we all had our tickets. I remember when we eventually got inside the screening, there was not a single seat free. Fast forward 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I remember walking out the cinema, experiencing a feeling that was somewhat similar to a feeling I experienced only a couple of months ago when I walked out the cinema after watching the first Avengers film for the very first time, of course. It was a feeling of absolute satisfaction, but with The Dark Knight Rises, it was a different kind. It was a feeling of finality and conclusiveness. This film did exactly what I had hoped it would do. It provided the perfect ending to Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. Like the previous film, The Dark Knight Rises starts with another incredible opening sequence, but this time on a plane and in the sky. This is when we're first introduced to Tom Hardy's Bane, and he was just magnificent. Like Heath Ledger's Joker performance, Tom Hardy owns absolutely every minute he is on screen in this film, but in a different kind of way. From the moment he started to speak, I was so fascinated, but at the same time, I was terrified. Yes, his character wasn't completely comic book accurate, but works so brilliantly in Christopher Nolan's realistic and modern day Gotham City, and was the perfect antagonist to Batman in this final installment of the Dark Knight trilogy. Physically, Tom Hardy's Bane is superior to Christian Bale's Batman in almost every way. He's faster, he's stronger, he's more ferocious, and the threat he posed was nothing like Batman had ever faced before. I think Christopher Nolan did a great job in making this clear during their first encounter with the sewer fight, which I think is arguably the best fight scene in the whole trilogy. I remember watching that scene in the cinema in just utter shock as Batman got destroyed in every possible way. When Bane broke Batman's back, I remember the screening went completely silent. It was so much to take in at the time. Tom Hardy is one of my favorite actors, and I think The Dark Knight Rises was the first time I properly saw him in a role aside from maybe Inception, which by the way guys, we will get to next week very soon. I'm very excited to talk about Inception. Anyways, what Tom Hardy is able to do in this film alone is just outstanding. The ability for him to just use his eyes and his voice to act is so impressive. I really love the sound design for his character. It's so overpowering, and I think it's a really great reflection of how dominating Bane really is as a character. Not to mention, of course, how many unforgettable quotes there are from his character in this film. I think what The Dark Knight Rises really does well is show both Batman and the character of Bruce Wayne at the lowest point in his life, and the complexities that come with this state. This is then used to really channel all the emotions into getting back up, into overcoming his challenges and rising as a fully realized hero and a symbol for hope. One of my favorite scenes in this whole trilogy is when Bruce is able to make the jump and escape from the pit that of course Bane sent him to. I often watch this scene when I want to be motivated and inspired, and of course just want an all-round adrenaline rush. Everything from the cinematography to the chanting of these prisoners, Hans Zimmer's score slowly building layer by layer until Bruce finally makes a jump, and then the score is absolutely blasting in the background like never before. I get fucking goosebumps every time with this scene. Christian Bale, in my opinion, gives his best performance as Bruce Wayne in the whole trilogy. The same can be said for Michael Caine. Now, when I rewatched this film a couple of days ago, I actually shed a few tears during some of the scenes with Alfred, because it dawns on me just how much Alfred is the heart of this film. And Michael Caine gives such a touching performance, and it's one of the best performances I've seen from him. As usual, Gary Oldman and Morgan Freeman are just excellent in their roles. Anne Hathaway as Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman, I liked a lot more than I thought I was going to. She's cunning, mysterious, but at the same time, she's a very human character. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was another really great addition to the cast as Blake, a young and hopeful detective who, like the audience, never stops believing in the Batman, even in the darkest of moments. And of course, one thing these films get better with every time is the Batman's tech, and in this film we get the Bat, and it is just fucking awesome. The Dark Knight Rises is definitely the biggest Batman film in terms of sheer scale and stakes, and I think Christopher Nolan does a really great job as the director to balance all the aspects that come with both the characters and the story. I do have a couple of nitpicks though, and that mainly comes with the extras of this movie. In a lot of the shots of the big action set pieces, particularly the final war for Gotham where there is the mercenaries versus the police, a lot of the extras in the background, you can tell they're not very experienced in giving a convincing fight. A lot of the punches and kicks don't seem to land, and sometimes they're just hovering on the same spot, waiting to react to things as opposed to actually fighting. But yeah, it's more of a nitpick rather than a flaw for me, because it doesn't take me out of the film. The real main conflict is the thing that you're focused on. You're not focused on the extras. You're focused on the rivalry between Bane and Batman, and it's so great and so convincing that the things with the extras I only noticed when I've rewatched this film multiple times. You're not going to really notice this on a first time watch. I mean, if you haven't seen the film and I'm telling you this now, you might look out for it. But for me, I didn't notice it on the first watch because I was so invested in the story. But yeah, it is just a little nitpick for rewatchability. But yeah, overall, I don't think that The Dark Knight Rises is as good as The Dark Knight. But I think Christopher Nolan beautifully rounds up what I think is undoubtedly the greatest comic book trilogy of all time, giving us an extremely emotional yet fulfilling end to the story of Bruce Wayne, and of course my favorite superhero, and that of course is Batman. And on that basis, The Dark Knight Rises gets an A+ from me. Like its two previous films, it is just an incredible piece of cinema, and I think it has cemented the Dark Knight trilogy as undoubtedly, like I said before, the greatest superhero comic book adaptation trilogy of all time. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like down below, and of course share your thoughts on The Dark Knight Rises. Do you love this film? Do you think it's disappointing? Let me know in the comments section and let's chat. Also, look forward to my next video, which will be on the whole Dark Knight trilogy, where I'm going to be going in and getting deep with some of my personal experiences with these films, some of my favorite moments of this trilogy, some of the best aspects of this trilogy. It's going to be a full deep exploration of the Dark Knight trilogy as a whole, so look forward to that video coming very soon. And of course guys, if you are new to this channel and you love talking about movies, this is the place for you, so don't forget to subscribe. As always guys, take it easy and I will see you very soon in the next video.